Hi students, it's Miss T. This is week 11, and I think I've been telling you for like 5 or 6 classes now that I'm going to be doing patriarchy the next time, and then I postpone it, and then I postpone it. Well, I'm not postponing it today. I even have it pre-written on my handy-dandy makeshift classroom's whiteboard back here. So I've got a long definition of patriarchy. You might have had shorter ones in other classes if you've heard this word before. But this is a great follow-up. Talking about this topic is a great follow-up to that last discussion that we had when we talked about the differences between race and ethnicity, and then also sex and gender, those two sets of vocabulary words. So those two sets of vocabulary words have specific sociological definitions, and so those are the definitions that I'm going to need to see you using if you answer an essay question on the test that asks you about those kinds of things. I need to see sociological definitions and not something that's quickly Googled, that you use the first couple of hits on Google what it is, and not even something that comes from sociology.com because, or another informative website, Quizlet or something like that. It's really easy to pick out those, the wording from those kinds of websites, and know that you haven't really done your studying or organized your notes or done your reading assignment from your textbook. Instead, you were trying to Google a few things and stick them together and maybe something that sounds pretty before you turn it in. So that's not what I want here. That's not what we've tried to do at all over the course of the semester. I know we're now all online instead of being able to be face-to-face, and that's not just kind of a bummer, it's a bummer if people still say bummer these days. Anyway, so we're making the best of it, but I want to give you that kind of heads up that it's really obvious when a student does a quick Google search for something and then parses together pieces of definitions that you find in various things, because Google will give you 728,000 hits, right? And your first 5 are going to have some good sounding information, but I need to see some of that sociological imagination development being worked out in your essay answers that are in your own words, from your own beautiful brain. That's what I want to read from you. Okay. So this particular lecture, finally, we're going to talk about patriarchy, and patriarchy really is the reason why these ascribed statuses that we talked about in the previous lectures, why these are so influential in your social mobility, in your position within social stratification. That's really why patriarchy is a major topic here, because the kind of patriarchy that we have in our society, you see that it is the most common social organizational pattern in the world. So social structure here, this word that I've got in our definition, of course, that is what all of Unit 2 was about, right? So you have your notes from Unit 2 that starts in Chapter 4, and all of those chapters were about different components of social structure. Social structure ranges from macro to micro. In this particular definition of patriarchy, it's a macro level organizational pattern for social structure. Now, I'm not saying that we need to go back to Chapter 4's notes and reorganize that chart thing, or that thing with all the curlicues in it that I tried to draw on the board in the classroom with you, but I am saying that kind of an umbrella over that social structure, with social institutions, statuses and roles, and social groups all wrapped up and connected into that social structure conglomeration. What I'm saying is this is kind of an umbrella or a cloud or a shadow that hangs over our social structure. It's a default pattern. Since I've used this word pattern, let's revisit a definition from Unit 1 that we don't really talk about as often as we should. I really need to start pointing this out a little bit more to you. But from way back in Chapter 1, we've got a definition of a term that Emile Durkheim coined for us in sociology. It's called a social fact. You can flip back to your chapter 1 notes and find it pretty easily. It's going to be on day 1 or day 2 that I talk about it, because it's a really it's an interesting kind of word to use when we're trying to develop our sociological imagination, because the concept of social facts, which is really more about reality than truth, two different things there, is about a pattern for the way society is shaped on the macro scale, which exerts control over our behavior on the micro scale to a large extent. And patriarchy is one of the social facts that you and I have to live with by being born or adopted or moving into the social structure in the US of A. We, like many, many, many countries and cultures and societies around the world, we have what's called a patriarchy. Some of you might have a short, quick definition for this word, a male-dominated society. That's not incorrect. I want to get more detail though. It's a pattern of social structure where the default position, the social fact, or the reality is that we by default learn in our socialization process that males have this position in the social hierarchy and non-males have these positions in the social hierarchy. Now, when I say non-males, we can start talking about gender distinctions in there. Remember, male is a sex category, female is a sex category, intersex is a sex category. But with genders, there are lots of males who have all the physiological, anatomical features of male, but have a gender behavior that's not on that far end of the spectrum that we talked about. So this patriarchy puts males in a dominant position. So males dominate in a patriarchy. That's what this first part of this word means. This comes from a Latin word, pater in Latin, or you can pronounce it in English, pater. Pater means father. And what we do here is to translate that into males. So males dominate. Anytime you have this archy, it's some kind of ranking, some kind of comparison between or among categories of things. So in a patriarchy, males dominate, but males within that sex category have other ascribed statuses that apply to them, and that's why we need to look at our particular brand, if you will, of patriarchy in the United States to understand where the other ascribed statuses kind of come into play and affect somebody's ability to have upward social mobility, or someone's ability to achieve the American dream, or the ability to have power in the sense that Max Weber described it for us. Can we wake up in the day and we don't really notice any obstacles in our way? We don't really have a hard time with life? That's the kind of power that macro scale social structure, when it's on your side, on the micro scale, you feel it, not really consciously, but because you just kind of have an easier time in life. And you don't even know that your way of life, that your style of life or your standard of living makes it easier for you, and you have fewer obstacles, you have greater life chances than the next person. But patriarchy is the organizational structure for our social structure in the United States. Patriarchy is a very common pattern throughout the world. So we're not going to pick on the USA when we're talking about patriarchy, keeping some people down. We're not picking on that, and it's not a male individual or a category of males in society. It's not anybody's fault that we have this system. We inherited this system. It's part of our social facts that we deal with as being a member of this society. Whether we're born, adopted, or migrated into this society, we deal with this system. Okay? Lots of countries in the world have this particular system too. Most of the countries in the world have this particular system. But For us, we're going to look at the USA and look at some of the other characteristics that the most dominant group in society, not just males, but what kind of male, so to speak, has the most power in Max Weber's sense of the word, what other characteristics contribute to an easy time in life, being able to make the world work on your behalf, being able to navigate life without having too many obstacles in your way in the first place. And if you do have obstacles, if you have power in the sense that Max Weber talked about, then you're going to be able to easily overcome those obstacles. Whereas for the rest of us, if we can't overcome those obstacles in our micro scale experience, we can use our sociological imaginations to connect the dots between macro scale social structural patterns that affect you and me on a daily basis. Not just you and me, but the neighbors and people in the next county and people in the next state and people in the next nation. The macro scale social pattern affects you and me on the micro scale. So we need to be able to hone that ability to make those connections between the macro and the micro. That's your sociological imagination. That's our goal this semester. Don't forget, that's what I want you to take from here on into whatever kind of degree plan you're going into. Okay? So that's my intro, I guess, and I think the rest of what I need to talk about with patriarchy is only about that long. So hopefully we'll have a kind of a shorter lecture today than that last doozy I put on YouTube for you. I think it was 40 minutes or something. I'll try to keep this one shorter. Okay, so let me erase this really quick. Whoops. Don't drop that. Okay, so let's talk about the kind of patriarchy that we have in the United States. You historians out there will be talking along with me because we're going to be talking about really who kind of set up the government and the social system that we have in the United States. So let's look at patriarchy as it is in the USA. Okay, how does patriarchy look in the USA? First of all, we know from the definition of patriarchy that if you are male, here is your ascribed status. If you are male, then you have an ascribed status that assists you in achieving goals in life. Males out there right now in class are probably thinking, I don't achieve my goals well. I can't get ahead. I can't. Just wait, because male isn't the only thing that you need to have on your side in order to be able to have the life chances that we're talking about that make those obstacles easily surpassable for someone. So, in the USA, yes, males dominate as a category of people, the ascribed status, but any patriarchy, males dominate. Let's look at other ascribed statuses specific to the USA that will further assist a male individual to have greater, let me say, enhanced life chances or a greater chance of achieving goals or the American dream, that kind of thing. So, the United States, most of us, especially if we come from east of the Mississippi River, but even the Louisiana Purchase area and certainly on toward the West Coast now, most of us know the USA to be influenced by the country England, right? So before the Louisiana Purchase, the land that we were standing on right now was French and Spanish, back and forth. And let's not neglect to say that the Native Americans owned it, before those folks stole it from them. But in the United States now, the majority of the land has a great influence by the English ethnic group. So English people have a couple of characteristics that go with their ethnic group. They have a racial category associated with them. The racial category associated with English is Caucasian. Okay, so the racial category associated with English is Caucasian. And the ethnic category associated with English is Protestant Christian. Okay, Protestant is a type of Christianity. Henry VIII and his daughter Elizabeth are vitally responsible in converting the English people from the Catholic Church, which was the only kind of Christianity in England before Henry VIII forced his version on everyone. And Protestant faith is what the English are known for. So, if you are male and you also are this and you also are this, then there are 3 boxes, 3 things you can check off, and the world is more likely to work on your behalf in the USA, that is. I say the world. The society in the USA is more likely to work on your behalf because this type person, and this type person set it up from the beginning. And you have to be especially trained to think about somebody else's point of view, somebody other than your own point of view. I think sometimes in sociology class over the last semester together, I think sometimes y'all have had some aha moments where you realize, wait a minute, I didn't know that things were different than what my life experience was. Wow, this group over here has a different perspective. Wow, this group over here has a different historical background. And that changes their outlook. It changes their life experience. But if you have a dominant group in a place that has certain characteristics in common, and they aren't trained to think outside their category of people, then they're not going to include your interests. They're not going to include your social justice issues. They're not going to include those kinds of things that don't apply to them. And don't think that I'm telling you that it is a conspiratorial kind of thing. No, it's that if we don't have training to be aware of diversity and to be aware of other people's attitudes, ideas, beliefs, conditions, we don't tend to seek out diverse points of view. We don't tend to be open and tolerant for people who are different than we are. We tend to be ethnocentric. So over the centuries of the development of USA culture, these type people have been in power, and therefore the world that they set up by default, if you fit this pattern, you're more likely to have an easier time going through life. It doesn't mean it'll be perfect, not at all, but I promise, you'll have an easier time than us non-males, us non-Caucasians, and us non-Protestants, okay? So, there is an acronym here that we can use for all of this, this English explanation here. You might have seen this acronym before. If not, fine, I'm going to tell you what it's all about. But here's the acronym. White is what the W stands for. White Anglo-Saxon is what that stands for. Protestant. Okay? White goes with the Caucasian. Anglo-Saxon goes with the particular English ethnicity, not Scottish, not Welsh, not Celtic, which, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that I even suggested that Celtic was anything close to English. It's not, it's Irish. But anyway, from the United Kingdom there, it's not Scottish, it's not Welsh, it's Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So this is the dominant group, and that's what WASP means. White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. Protestant is a type of Christianity. Okay? So, if you are a Christian individual, particularly any kind of Protestant in the United States, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, any of these kinds of Protestant religious faiths in the United States, and you happen to be white, and you happen to be male, you are more alike to the founding fathers, if you will, and look at that. We don't have founding mothers, we have founding fathers because they're the ones who were default position. We assume you're going to be in control. We'll sew the flag together, Betsy Ross, but somebody else is going to write the rules. okay? So it was male, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who wrote the rules, okay? And so the rules that we live by, the more you have in common with these groups, the easier time you have, okay? There's more. Of course there's more, because let's talk about that gender thing, okay? So male is about body parts and body chemistry. It's not about behavior. Boy is about behavior. Man is about behavior. Elder is about behavior. Groom is about behavior. Divorced is about behavior. Those are gender words that can and do apply to male, okay? But when we look at that spectrum, masculine over here and femininity over here, the farther you are toward the masculine side, the more likely it is that the world will work on your behalf. You might have heard of something called the gender binary. Well, that is the default position that these folks, when they're setting up the USA that we inherited from them from centuries before, when they're setting up the USA, gender binary was their default position. So masculine, feminine. And there really wasn't any room for inclusion for anybody in between if that really didn't, not too far in between. I mean, there were ranges, kind of like our norms drawing that we have from earlier in the semester. There are ranges of acceptable masculinity. There are ranges of acceptable femininity, but if you didn't fit within those ranges on the opposite end of the spectrum, you really didn't have an easy time in life. And still, you can see some struggles for people who are not having an easy time in life because they don't fit into that gender binary. So let's put that on the list here as something that is an obstacle that you would have to overcome or that's going to work against you in the kind of society that we inherited from previous generations. So there's this idea of a gender binary. Binary is this one, one and one, okay? So two and only two sides. But there's also another issue that we didn't talk about really when I was covering some of those gender issues and sex issues from the 10th chapter of our textbook. And here's a word, just a good word for you to know. This word is heteronormative. Heteronormative. So a norm, I hope I don't have to tell you what the definition of a norm is by this point in the semester, but I hope that you see the breakdown of this longer word. Normative has the word norm in it, okay? And hetero here refers to heterosexuality. So we've put more checkboxes on this list, essentially, that the more checks you can put beside all of these things, like if there's a box here, and there's a box here, and there's a box here, and a box here, and a box, oops, that's an ugly box, anyway, and a box there, the more checks that you can put in these boxes, the more likely it is that the world works on your behalf. I'm going back to that Max Weber definition of power constantly, because it's not so much a power like you can overcome with force obstacles, but it's this built-in power in this matrix that we've been talking about that is social structure. It's this built-in power that we inherit that. We inherit our position within that structure based on how this has been built, who's been in control of the U.S. culture that we inherited up to this point. If you are non-male, you have more obstacles. And right now, the females and the non-gender conforming folks who are watching this, if you are a cisgendered male, there's a word from chapter 10, please look it up in the textbook. If you're a cisgendered male, then you have a much easier time in society because other cisgendered males set up this society that we live in. If you are a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cisgendered male, then you are definitely, you got all these boxes checked because you are living in a society that was set up by people like you. And it's not that people like you are mean, nasty, and self-centered. It's that in a patriarchy, people like cisgendered males who are Caucasian and Christian Protestant, cisgender kind of is a word that kind of incorporates both of these things at once. So if you are a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, cisgendered male, then you are in the same category of people who set up the social structure that we have today. And therefore, life is easier for you in many, many ways than it is for people who can't check all of these boxes. Okay? Much easier. Now, some of you white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cisgendered males who are watching this right now are saying, this lady is full of it because my life ain't easy. I'm not talking about isolated examples on the micro scale. I'm not even talking about dozens of examples on the micro scale, or hundreds or thousands across the United States on the micro scale. I'm talking about the social structure of the United States, and I'm not picking on the United States, but it's the country where we're standing right now, so we're going to examine it. But if you follow all these boxes, these ascribed statuses on this ugly list right here that I threw on this board, then you by default inherited a position where it could be easier for you if the norms that are part of our social structure, all of the norms, folkways, mores, and laws, if you follow the norms that these predecessors of yours set up, then you will have fewer obstacles to overcome. And when you do have obstacles, they will be easier for you to overcome than if you are somebody that I'm talking to right now who can't check all these boxes. So, patriarchy exists all over the world. It's the most common social structure all over the world. Let me repeat that because I don't want anybody to say, she hates the USA, she hates men. No, sorry, wrong. I'm looking at the social structure, and with my educated viewpoint, with my informed, what's the word I'm looking for? Intuition. That's still not the right word, but anyway, with the information that I know, I can deduce, and I'm not alone, many scholars will tell you exactly the same thing. This is why females and non-cisgendered males have a lower position, power-wise, respect-wise, job-wise, than cisgendered males do. If you are non-Caucasian, then you have had additional obstacles to overcome just because of this silly thing that we talked about last time called race, that's culturally defined, not based on science. It's just based on silly physical characteristics, random physical characteristics. We overlook some physical characteristics that could classify us, and other physical characteristics we use to classify us. Don't ask me why. It's a silly thing until we see that in our patriarchy, race was a part of this. Particularly the white Anglo-Saxon ethnic group, Protestant ethnic group, and gender binary, check this box, heteronormative, the assumption of heterosexuality, check that box, and you've got the characteristics of the category of people who have an easier time navigating their way up on that social ladder. They have an easier time navigating their way through income, occupation, and educational opportunities and life chances for advancement, life chances for comfort, much less likely to have to worry at all about anything like relative poverty. Not at all. As a matter of fact, let me stand aside, make sure you can get a good view of this if you need to pause the video. But let's talk about one more thing, tie this into poverty for just a second, and look at a term from chapter 10. Actually, it's been in the textbook before chapter 10. I think it was in chapter 7, and I think it was also in chapter 6, I think. I don't know. It's been there several times. But let's look at this concept. The feminization. Did I put too many N's in there? Feminization Thank goodness for the little side of my hand so I can erase that stuff. The feminization, I left out, anyway, spell feminization correctly. I hope the YouTube captions do it. But anyway, I'm just not going to spell it right today. Feminization of poverty is a phrase or a vocabulary word, if you want to say that it's a vocabulary word. It is the process. So anytime this is on the end of a word is a process. It's an increasing process or a decreasing process that people who are feminine, females, have a greater likelihood of experiencing poverty in their lives, whether it is absolute, relative, or subjective poverty, but relative mostly, in the USA. People who are female tend to be the ones who experience poverty. Specifically, in comparison to patriarchy, this occurs when the female is the head of household. Okay, so head of household is really a tax word. It's in the census that you should be filling out right now, and if your folks are filling it out, because we're taking census information once every 10 years, it's a constitutional feature that we have to participate in. We're obligated, it's our patriotic duty to participate in the census so we know the population out there, the population's interests, the population's background, the population's religious connection or income connection, education level, all of those kinds of things that work into socioeconomics. So the census over the last several decades has given us information that more people who are females who report that they are the head of household alone. There is no male present to also share in the household economy. So when females report as being the head of household, they tend to fall within those official poverty lines within those areas where they live. And this is primarily for another reason. It's called the wage gap. The wage gap. A gap is a little spot where things don't connect. And so the wage gap is something that in my lifetime has gotten really much better. For instance, I work for the state of Arkansas. The state of Arkansas, any state government anywhere, does not participate in a wage gap. They make sure that both male, female, or among males, females, and intersex individuals, there is no difference in pay for the same job. But that's what wage gap means. Different pay for males and females for the same job. Different pay for males and females for the same job. That's what wage gap essentially means. But after you write that down, I want you to think about something deeper than this. I'm not just talking about a job like a computer programmer, and male, females, or intersex individuals who are computer programmers should all get the same pay. That's kind of too microscale. Let's think a little bit about why in the first place there was this wage gap, and why in the first place this head of household, we don't really distinguish. We don't say male head of household, that's like the default position. We'll say female head of household because that's the exception position. It's supposed to be the exception position. These days, tons of females are the head of their own household. There's no male present to help with domestic duties, or economic duties. So a female head of household is the breadwinner in the household, but because of this wage gap issue that goes deeper than simply one job, let's talk about the difference between jobs that we default to males should be the ones who do this, and we default to females should. Let me put that word should in air quotes, okay? Should be the one to do this. So, daycare worker, there's a job. And when I say daycare worker, is your default position to somebody who is neither male nor female? Or do you go to one side or the other? And if you went to the female side and you learned that there's 2 or 3 males working in a daycare that you considered sending your kids to, would you be suspicious of those males' motives? because females tend to have the nurturer, there's my air quotes again, nurturer label in society. Males tend not to have that. Let me also say another job, oil rig worker. Most oil rig workers go and work for 3 months on the rig, and they're staying in bunk beds, you know, on the rig and showering together and everything. They make great money, by the way. High school diploma, great money right out of the bat. But most often, females won't do that job, not because they aren't physically or mentally able to do that job, but because of that nurturer role. If you're 3 months on the oil rig and a month at home, or whatever the pattern is, some of y'all know the pattern, I'm sure, better than I do. If you're 3 months on a rig and a month at home, that's not much of a homemaking, nest-making, lifestyle-maintaining kind of job. And so if you follow norms in society for what a female is, look at all my air quotes, what a female is supposed to do and want and be, a mother, a nurturer, those kinds of things, then being away from the home for long periods of time and then back available to devote to the home is just not conducive to those norms in society. Now, right now, some of you are thinking about exceptions to the rule. I know this male daycare worker, and he's just fine. There's no suspicion about it. I know this female oil rig worker or some other job that's typically male in society, and she's just fine. There's no problem that she has. But remember, in sociology, we're not looking at the exceptions to the rule. We're looking at the rule. We're looking at trends across the board. So if when I began to talk about this, you were like, oh yeah, okay, oh, but I know this exception, bring it back in from that exception. And let's talk about the trends across the board and not the exceptions to those rules. Yes, there are exceptions to those rules, but in sociology class, we're looking at the broad picture across the board and the micro scale life examples that fit that broad spectrum across the board. So, this is, look at all the ascribed statuses embedded into this. Look at the social stratification kind of stuff embedded into this. There's going to be family stuff. In the next unit, we're going to start out with really examining the sociological perspective of the family, and we will revisit stuff like household work versus work in the economic force, and head of household and domestic versus a professional dichotomy, that kind of stuff in the household structure, and how the household in general is the basic economic unit of society. And with a female as the head of household, with no other adult present to share the workload or to share the income needs, then that by far puts females into a category of people that overwhelmingly in the last 40 and 50 years have increased their numbers of people who are impoverished in this nation. Single females, single moms, divorced females without a second spouse tend to experience poverty in much higher numbers than married females or a female with a partner in adulthood, sharing expenses, sharing domestic duties, and those kinds of things. So, patriarchy is an important concept, but it's deeper than just this male-dominated society thing that you probably have learned as a quick go-to definition for this whenever you have talked about it in other classes. In our class, remember, I want you to move deeper into the nuances of things, and so that's why we examined the USA kind of patriarchy that we have, all those ascribed statuses that are in our checklist back there. If I misspelled feminization, then please spell it correctly for me. You can send me a text. And all of this information comes from chapters 9 and 10 in this social stratification chapter. We have one more lecture that I'm going to give you before we are ready for our Unit 3 test. So this is one of the lectures. You'll have one more lecture where we talk about prejudice and discrimination and look at the difference between those things, and then look at institutional discrimination compared to personal discrimination. We'll make some distinctions between those two things, where the patriarchy topic is going to come back in, the ascribed status topic is going to come back in, and we'll have to decide whether, based on prejudice and discrimination, attitudes and actions, do some people have an easier time in life than others based on the social structure, the assumptions on the macro scale about how things ought to be or about how things are. And I'm manipulating my computer right now so that I can stop the video soon, so I couldn't put air quotes around how things ought to be or how things are, because I'm talking about social facts. I'm talking about the reality of life in the USA, what we inherited by birth, adoption, or migration into this area. This is the social structure we have, and it really greatly affects our life chances. It greatly affects your ability to have social mobility. It greatly affects your American dream experiences in life based on what your all those ascribed statuses are. Okay, so watch one more lecture with me and look for lots of announcements on Blackboard. Text me with questions. Use the discussion boards on Blackboard that I have posted for you. And we'll have one more lecture before you get that announcement for Unit 3's test, which you'll have about a week to work on that. Okay, don't be a stranger. Stay healthy.